Today is Sunday, September the 12th, 2021. The time is 3:28 a.m. in the night. I am in one of the greatest, no, the appropriate word would be in one of the most challenging and painful tests of my spiritual and moral character in my entire life. Where to begin? I am a priest of Apollo. I am a shaman of animals of the spirit world. And I am adeptus, an initiated adeptus of the Order of the Golden Dawn. In each of these, I have sacred values, spiritual ideas, and while it may sound strange, it is what I am bound to, what I have bound myself to. For instance, to give you an example, when I became adept of the Order of the Golden Dawn, I swore that I would answer any spiritual question that anyone ever asked me without wishing any payment in return. So I cannot deny people who seek me for spiritual answers. However, there is a clause: I can make the trials difficult. But such spiritual oaths, which I swore, bind me above all other obligations that are my obligations to the divine and the spirits. I've lived my life, I'm 50 years now. I've lived my life like that since I was in my late teens. And whatever befell me in the material world, in my regular life, or in societal or political ongoings, I never for a second doubted that this was my calling from the beginning, and I do not doubt it now either. Not that you are mistaken. Anyway, we are all connected to people in very close bonds, husbands or wives, children, people who are beloved to us. On what could be the most responsible bond and responsibility for our parents when they grow old. When my father was 70, which was 2012, he had his first stroke, and it was the first and only time that I saw my father cry in fear. And it was a terrible sight for a son to behold. I had talked about my father having lived with him together in those final years. I talked with my father often about that he would set me in the lawful right that if he could no longer decide for himself and be dependent on machines, that I should shut them down, that he would not wish to live on machines. That case happened in 2015. when the doctors and my sister called me that he has lost conscious and there is no hope than to let him live constantly depending on machines. I well remember that a family from a friend's friend did something which I found impossible. Their father fell to depend on machines. He was just a body kept alive for decades, 20 years if I remember correctly, because none of them wanted to give the allowance to shut down the machines. And I was very connected with my father. So I asked the doctors and my sister that day in 2015, I wanted one day, 24 hours, to see if the situation yet changes or if I get spiritual insight from the gods. After 24 hours had passed, it was clear that my father, and he had told me many times, but spoken very open about these things, he would not have want on the machine, and worse yet, even if after it was explained to me, even if after months my father would ever have come out of the machines, he would be physically capable to do nothing. And from the long and personal conversations with my father, I knew that was what he wanted to avoid by any cost. So they raised the dosage of morphine so that it would be in constant sleep and feel nothing. And 1, 2, or 3 days later, in the early morning hours of 8:15, my sister called me, which is an unusual time for me to be called, of course, so I knew before I went to the telephone what was happened. By tradition of old, I went into my father's bedroom, where he had not been for weeks, being in the hospital, and I took out the battery and stopped the clock at the time. For the following years I had dreams and nightmares, both pleasant dreams and terrible nightmares about my father. But in the last 2 years they have largely faded away. And I think that is good, because finally I'm believing in reincarnation, having the feeling that my father's soul can move on. And I stopped calling him in times of personal need, which I think was for both of us fair and right. Now with my mother, she's 70, which is not just such a great age, but she has for 35 years, about give or take 30 years, it's not entirely clear to me, an autoimmune illness called multiple sclerosis, which gradually damaged the mind and as such the faculties to remember, to concentrate, and may quite well, further down the lines in a few years, destroy her ability to recognize or mentally handle anything. I had hoped that it would not accelerate like that. And both my father and my mother come from a generation who really endured suffering without complaining. The dark reality is that I have a sister. It's not the dark reality. The dark reality is my mother was afraid of mortal illnesses from a very early age. I suppose the responsibility lies with her own bad parents. I mean, they were not bad people, but they treated her badly, yes. It's a little bit complicated, but let it be with this. Now my mother lives here, just not far from here. I phone with her once or twice a day, though in recent 2 years it became more and more difficult because my area is first spirituality, religion, occultism, on the other hand politics. And with occultism is only a disturbance of the brain for her, so it's not something that I care to talk about her. And she's largely in the political mainstream, so any discussion we would have about politics would quite quickly become confrontational. And then personally, I have not much to report about my life, which makes talking with her, as much as I want to be there for her, to have someone to speak to, we don't have any topics to. Now, last evening, at Saturday the 11th, she called me quite late, around 10 p.m. in the evening, knowing that I would still be awake, so it's, as usual, not a problem. But it was an unusual time for her. And at first she asked me about train collections. There is here in Spandau a main train station, and then she asked me how fast are the trains driving and in what areas are they driving, or are they driving fast when they leave the train station, or are they driving fast into the train station when they enter. And I know my mother well enough, some of you may guess it. She was considering suicide. She told me that her life was going down the drain because her mental faculties were... She had more and more difficult to make banking. More and more difficulties. She's still going and buying food. Is still going to the groceries or more. These such things are still manageable, easy for her. When it's easy, but okay. So I have not an entire idea how difficult it is, but I assume because her sister had Alzheimer, or has, she's extremely old now, but she has Alzheimer, and she recognizes nobody and nothing. So mentally she is entirely gone from the world. And of course my mother, which is her sister, I can humanly understand that she does not wish to go through such a process and ponders to end her life before going into mental oblivion. Now I have to say one thing clearly, I'm not a Christian. I'm a pagan, I'm a Roman priest. And as you know, in pagan religion and in Roman morality, ancient Roman morality, I believe that every human being owns his life and owns his death. I do not believe it is a sin I do not believe it is harmful to the soul, but when someone sees, okay, the suffering is too great, I believe any human being has the right to end their life, because they belong to us alone. Now, she didn't reveal to me what she aimed for, but I understood it after a time. She was probably trying to not let me find out, but of course it is quite idle. We know each other quite well, and for each of us it is quite difficult to hide things from each other. I did not outright say the word, but after a while I talked about her. What I suggested is that she would get a social worker to help her, who visits her twice or 3 times a week. And the problem is she has a very small apartment, the same size as I have, and it is filled, littered. It is a messy's apartment, and she told me she would be just too ashamed to let anyone in, which I can understand given how it looks. And she was always very tidy and cleanly before. Still, I tried to talk to her because one of her doctors said that she could go into what is the English word? Where old people go when they can't care for themselves. I'm sorry, I have to look this up to be certain to report this correctly. Retirement home. Okay, I've never heard that word in that context. Into a retirement home. And there she would be cared for, and she fears, of course, losing her autonomy entirely. And as one who values his autonomy greatly, I can greatly understand that fear. That despite my depression and my anxieties and so forth, I try, and the depression that often hinders me to do the most normal, regular things, I try to do as much as myself for as long as I can. I'm far from being so ill like her, just to say that clearly, but I can understand the notion. And so it was what I suggested. In Germany you can get social worker who come to you 2 or 3 times a week and care for help you with telephone, with looking into your bank account and all this stuff. They just help you with this, and my mother wouldn't lose her autonomy, and she would still be able to live in her old apartment. So it would be an intermediate step to not entirely go to the old man's pension and there essentially lock her away, so to speak. Also, of course, for me personally, that is the thing, because I'm not vaccinated, and I will fight against my vaccination with all my might, because I fear it and I have good reasons to not, but that's not the point. Is the question, will I ever be able to see my mother again, is if she gets into such a place. But the question is, I am in no condition to understand what I should say and advise. I mean, I have told her I cannot judge how horrible you feel your life is. And I have not named it, I have not called the word suicide. But I told her I know what you think, what you want to do. And I will not, how did I say it? I will not condemn you for doing it, because I believe every human being has the right to decide that for him or herself, and that is what I truly believe. But on the other hand, some people commit suicide much prematurely, or so at least we from the outside believe sometimes. But then thinking of Robin Williams, for instance, who was strongly depressive and addicted to various substances, if I've heard correctly, there's the question, would it have made sense to go on or not? That's something only the individual can decide. And I believe life belongs to the person, to each individual itself. But of course, there is the other element. I am a spiritual person. I regard, in a Buddhist way, the physical body as a temporary clothing that we wear, a temporary identity that we take, and that the only thing that is real is the soul or the spiritual self. And as such, is that not, I mean, I know I will suffer, but can I make my suffering afterwards of the suicide of my mother put above the suffering of my mother? Should I not be able to bear living with that decision of her and not talk her out of it, so she has the ability to make and choose her own end when she feels that she can no longer bear it? But there is another aspect which is vital. I have a sister. She is married and has 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. And I am quite certain that my sister and my nieces and my nephew may be tormented by that for years. Because we know suicide of family members is for many people something that scars them for a long time. What is the morally right thing to do? I must say, since to my own strong chronic depression, my own fatigue, and my own anxiety attacks, I am not in the position to do much practical help. Unfortunately, I cannot go up and help her clean her room, besides for a very trivial reason that she would never let me. She would let my sister, but my sister has a job and has 3 children, and I heard from my sister that my sister was emotionally extremely dragged down by our mother when my sister was already still quite young, and my mother always was fearing about her death and her illness. And I heard this from my sister only after my father's death in 2015, which was a shock to me. I had no idea. So apparently my sister has suffered from contact with our mother for quite a considerable time. So I'm torn also on that front. I could pull her in. She is a pragmatic, down-to-earth person who is technically able to help my mother in those down-to-earth decisions. There are a few she has to make, like, well, it's not important here. Things like with contracts and testaments and other things of which I just know too little. And I would not trust to help her decide about such things, because it's just too way out of my expertise. And also there is the question for me, the moral conundrum. Should I bring in my sister, thinking, okay, in this last years that my mother has now in front of her, probably, or at least her last waking years. My aunt has still Alzheimer and has it for, I don't know, 20, 25 years and is gone in that land of lost mind, and it is quite a terrible idea. But anyway, whatever happens, the time where my sister is able to have any halfway reasonable conversation with my sister is growing short. On the other hand, I think after all the pain that she got from contact with our mother, and she has children of her own, and she is dragged down emotionally from contact with our mother, where is the morality of that I should carry that alone and not drag her into this and allow her to have just a good time with the children, with her children and her husband. All these are moral questions to which I so far have no clear answer, and they weigh heavily on my soul. When I said I see myself here more in the role of a priest than a son, an adeptus of my spiritual order and a shaman of the spirit world, that is because I have rules. I cannot help my mother as a son, because my role as priest, shaman and adeptus is the core of my identity. It has been for the far longest part of my life. I am bound to some oaths I took, to some things I believe are sacred. I am extremely clueless how to handle this. I can feel that it's draining, extremely straining and painful for me. Short side note, I have entirely gotten out of pills. So if the handful of people who have sent me sleep pills, or I have to look up the other word. Sorry, just a minute. Tranquilizers, calming pills. I had calming pills called bromazepam or bromazanil. So and I'm asking this because it's really a strange time. If some people in the past had sent me Tavor, Zolpidem or bromazanil listening to this, if some of you could send me them again, because it's really a unbelievably strenuous time for me, I would be greatly indebted to you. Anyways, it's just a small side note. I cannot expect you to answer for me what to do in this question. But I have felt I had to speak it here. And hopefully you have to forgive it if I speak it in English, because right now I need the distant language so I can speak it without it getting too close to my emotional inner field. Whatever goes through your mind, feel free to post. Thank you for listening to me, and sorry for bringing such dark perspectives to you. Be blessed, my friends.